Okay, well, I've had a few questions about required rate of return. Now, some people are either completed or getting stuck into topic 2, although you should be on to topic 3, and I'll record topic 4 soon. Required rate of return, where does it come from? Look, if you're borrowing money, it's pretty obvious what the rate of return is. It's how much you've basically got to pay back to your financiers. So if you're borrowing, it's really easy. If you're earning 10%, if you're paying 10% to the people who've lent you money, then your project has got to make more than 10%. Pretty obvious, right? Well, what you're doing when you're discounting, you have to understand. If you're discounting at 10%, the discounting process basically turns the investment flows into a present value, which is just a fancy way of saying takes out the interest. If you take out the interest, do I still have more or less value than the amount that I've borrowed? So the cost of capital, and to keep it really obvious, if I'm borrowing at 10%, and I've got a yield that's giving me 11%, then a project that's giving me 11%, if I discount that at 10, I still get a number higher than the original investment, right? Than the original amount borrowed. Because the only way you get a zero net present value is discounting at the implicit rate of return, so the 11%. So if your cost is 10%, but you've got something that's yielding you better, you should get a net present value that's positive. And in fact, you do. Okay, so that's where you can get a rate of return, and that's a real rate of return, a real required rate of return if you're borrowing. What about if you've got some people investing equity? Okay, it might be a little bit harder to get a handle on what the number is. It's not in a contract anywhere. But the people who have financed you have an expectation of what the rate of return should be. They're expecting you to give them, 20% or whatever, or 10%. For their next best alternative, what will make them happy? Right? If their next best alternative is investing with someone else at 15%, then you'd better be better than 15%. So in that case, the required rate of return will be 15%. You've got to basically satisfy them. You've got to do at least as well as their next best alternative. And that's sort of, this is how financiers think about it, or people who invest equity think about it, whether explicitly or implicitly. And that actually leads on to the idea of opportunity cost. I mean, even if nobody else is investing money in your project and you've got a ton of cash sitting around, you've still got to do a net present value calculation, right? Because you want to say, is investing in this thing better than just shoving the money in the bank? So if the money in the bank is going to give you 5%, then you do all your net present value calculations at 5%. And if the number works out less on your investment, that means, hey, your investment's yielding less than 5%. So negative net present value. If the investment sucks, don't invest in it. Alternatively, if you think the cash flow is going to be awesome and they're going to give you higher than a 5% rate of return, when you discount at that 5% rate of return, you're going to get a positive net present value. And that's what it's all about. Net present value is just about saying, look, the R is how much you've got to get. You've either got to get because banks are chasing you for it, or you've got to get it because that's your next best alternative. Why would you invest in this project if your next best alternative is going to give you a better yield? So what you're sort of doing by doing the net present value is you're standardizing the cash flows or measuring them against your next best alternative. And in the case of borrowing, your next best alternative is actually paying off the loan. So that's where we get the required rate of return from. It's a real number. It's basically saying we're trying to compare this project against something else that we can do. We can pay off the loan that we got for the project. We can stick our money in the bank and get such and such a rate of return. I hope that gets you a little bit more of a handle about what we mean when we're talking about cost of capital and required rate of return, or required yield. They're all names for the same thing. I hope that helps.